In our society, there are three sectors: the private, the public, and the nonprofit. That third sector, the nonprofit, is what this show is all about. I have with me today Joe Frost, Community Preservation Specialist with Indiana Landmarks. Did I get it right?
You did. Hello. How are you?
Joe, I'm well. I'm very well today. How are you today?
I'm doing very well.
And I'm excited to talk to you about a couple of different projects, specifically in Wayne County. Actually, they continue throughout the state. One of them does, especially today on our show. First of all, though, I'd like to give a little bit of background to our community about Indiana Landmarks, and particularly the office that you're associated with.
Sure. I work for Indiana Landmarks, and Indiana Landmarks was created in the early 1960s, and we are a statewide non-for-profit for preservation, historic preservation advocacy. And so we're very fortunate within Indiana Landmarks to have 9 regional offices statewide. And Cambridge City is home to our Eastern Regional Office located at the Huddleston House. So from that office, we provide advocacy work for historic preservation for 13 counties in East Central Indiana. And everything from working with property owners to help them, guide them to do the right thing with their historic property, to working with historic preservation commissions and towns and so forth. So that's the major component of what we do, but part of our mission is to connect people with their heritage. And so we do that through the use of the Huddleston House, which I think we want to talk about.
We do want to talk about the Huddleston House. And of course, you already know that I'm a little attached to this topic because I do live in Cambridge City. I have been at the Huddleston Farmhouse. So I'm interested in what's been going on in recent years, and particularly right now and in the near future. So can you tell me a little bit about the history of the farmhouse and kind of what's happened in the past there?
Sure. The Huddleston House was built by John Huddleston in 1841, and it was built at a time where the historic National Road was being constructed. He actually purchased the property the year after the road was finished through Indiana in 1835. And anyways, so it's a museum and sort of multi-functioning site because it is our offices as well. It opened to the public in the early 1980s, and we're trying a few new things that haven't been tried before. In fact, the newest thing that we have at the Huddleston House is our farmers market. We've sort of dubbed it the Huddleston Farmers Market, and it runs from June through September, and is an opportunity to bring local farm vendors and the local community together at a historic site, not necessarily for the history, but for the agriculture of the site, because it was a farm historically.
And this was the first year for that farmers
This was the
market.
first year.
And
2012 was the first year.
Would you say it was successful?
It was successful. It was a little slower than we had anticipated, but a lot of that I think had to do with the weather, which was certainly out of our control.
We had an unusual summer.
Unusual hot summer, so we didn't have near as much produce as we had anticipated. But moving forward, we're already planning for 2013. We already have some vendors who are committed, and we're really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great opportunity to continue to grow, and it's a great opportunity not only for Cambridge City, but for Wayne County as a whole.
So the vendors, are they local Cambridge City or local like Wayne County area?
Wayne County area. We actually had one vendor who did produce from Henry County, so sort of the local region.
Wonderful, that's good.
A little bit beyond Wayne County.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what has happened before at the Huddleston Farmhouse, because I know when I was there, I was actually in the home, and then I know that there had been some reenactment kinds of things happening and that kind of thing. So talk a little bit about what that was like, and then maybe what that might look like in the future.
Some of the programs we've had, as you mentioned, the Civil War reenactment, it's ranged from Civil War events to hearth suppers over the open hearth, to day camps for students and school programs, and even the average tour that you and I as average visitors may expect on a typical day. So sort of a wide range of things. in 2011, we were fortunate enough to partner with the Indiana National Road Association, whom I work very closely with, to bring a new exhibit to the basement of the Huddleston House, which is the National Road Heritage Site. It describes the entire history of the National Road from east to west, from Maryland to Illinois, painting that broad picture. And so our plan is to not only utilize that site as tours, but to expand on that and hopefully maybe do a Civil War event again in the future, because that program's been sort of dormant for many years.
Right.
Perhaps coupling with the farmers market and with the vendors and contacts we're making there, making the hearth dinner, if we do go forward with it, something that's even more meaningful, because there'll be local produce and local stuff that is grown either on site or nearby. So it's a blank canvas. It was closed down for a couple of years to prepare for the new exhibit, and we went through some staffing changes, and I came on board last November, and our director, J.P. Hall, came on board earlier in 2011. So fresh faces, fresh ideas, and we're looking forward to making the site viable again.
So you talked a little bit about when you came on board. Why did you connect with Indiana Landmarks? What is your attraction to this kind of work?
Sure. I have a master's degree from Ball State in historic preservation. And when I was in high school, I'd actually kind of started around then. I worked at a historic site as a volunteer, and then as a seasonal employee, and worked at Fort Mackinac in northern Michigan and Harpers Ferry National Park. So it's sort of one thing led to another, and while I was working on my degrees, and came to Indiana Landmarks because of the opportunity and real advocacy work that Landmarks does. Landmarks is the largest statewide non-for-profit that deals with historic preservation advocacy across the country. So it's a great opportunity for a career perspective and growth perspective to work with them.
So we've talked a little bit about the farmers market, and I'd like to expand upon that a little bit, because I think there are dreams. I've heard there are dreams of adding to that, partnering that with other kinds of things to draw a variety of types of crowds into the property.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about what those might possibly look like?
Yeah, not to reveal too much too soon, but farmers market is on Saturday mornings through the summer season, and it provides a great opportunity for us to sort of have a captive audience, if you will. One of the things that we've kind of batted around was maybe a classic car show at the same time as farmers market. Maybe doing some living history. If we do a Civil War event again, maybe it's a living history event coupled with the farmers market. So basically using that event, using that program to couple with other programs that not necessarily have to do with agriculture, but not necessarily have to do with history either. We're fortunate that the Huddleston House is more meaningful than just its history. It's meaningful because it's a historic site that was saved, so it's meaningful for historic preservation purposes. It's meaningful because of westward expansion and the National Road. So we have a great opportunity to discuss a lot of different themes, and having an audience there every Saturday is one way to doing that.
That would be great. That would be wonderful. And something for lots of different kinds of, I can picture families going.
Indeed,
and groups, clubs and groups going together.
Families, scout troops, church groups, they're more than welcome. And we're always looking for volunteers to help us out.
That's where I was going next.
Yeah, I kind of
we have a few more minutes left, and we want to always make sure that we allow the community the opportunity to know how they get involved.
Well, one way to get involved is to give us a call, or even check out our website, www.indianalandmarks.org, and there's a link on there to the Huddleston House. And we have a wide range of volunteer opportunities, everything from docents to do the tours to education type facilitators to help us out with our school programs, to somebody to help weed the garden. So whatever you're interested in, we can find a spot, and it usually begins with an individual conversation with myself or JP, our director, and going from there.
Now, I was going to say, as far as the volunteer opportunities, I don't know much about history, unfortunately, but I could sure weed a garden.
Exactly. So there's tons of opportunities, and some of it may be as simple as helping to set up a booth for a vendor at a farmer's market or something like that. So a large wealth of opportunities.
I always like to make sure the community understands, and I think that this is a unique opportunity because there are so many different ways that you could volunteer, whether it be for a short period of time or a long term, and you would provide any type of training somebody would need. Yeah. What can we do besides volunteer hours to support the Huddleston Farmhouse or Indiana Landmarks in general?
Indiana Landmarks is a member-based organization. So one way that you can help is by giving financial donations or even becoming a member.
Okay.
And membership includes, a publication that's put out every 2 months by our marketing department, and it highlights the real preservation work that Landmarks is doing, not only locally but statewide, and so that's one way. And then donations of time or even financial gifts certainly help us out in putting together programs or setting up meetings to talk about education of historic preservation. You name it, it all helps out.
And if someone has questions, wants to volunteer, any way at all, they need to contact you, and how would they do that? They
can contact me at EAST at indianalandmarks.org via email, or they can reach me at my direct line at 317-822-7939.
Okay. Anything else last minute before we change topics and talk about
I don't think
anything about the Huddleston Farmhouse? Okay, we'll take a break and then we'll come back and talk about another part of Indiana Landmarks. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan.
And we'll be right back. Welcome back to the third sector, and my guest that I have with me is Joe Frost, Community Preservation Specialist with Indiana Landmarks. So I'm so glad that you're here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And previously we talked a lot about the Huddleston Farmhouse, and I know a little bit more about that since I'm in Cambridge City and I've actually been there. But we want to expand on that. And part of the reason why we even talked about the Huddleston Farmhouse was because of its location on the National Road. So this gives us an opportunity to expand on our previous conversation and explore what's going on with the National Road.
Sure.
So can you explain to me a little bit maybe about history, and then we'll go into what's happening now, because there's some pretty exciting things that have just happened.
Indeed. Well, I guess the first question is, what is the National Road? Is what a lot of people ask me. Is what is this thing? Well, it goes back, to our founding fathers. George Washington was a young British officer during the French and Indian War, and operating in western Pennsylvania when they realized the need to connect the Potomac River watershed to the Ohio River watershed over the Allegheny Mountain Range. And proved very difficult, of course, and they built a trail called Braddock's Trail early on. And so Washington understood the need for a road. And as America grew as a young country, young republic, westward was opportunity. And so the need for expanding on that original trail and bringing a road into the new states of the old Northwest Territory, namely Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, was certainly on the agenda of Thomas Jefferson. And in 1806, Jefferson approved the funding to fund the National Road from Cumberland, Maryland to Vandalia, Illinois. Now, the significance of this is not just that Jefferson approved funds for a road, but Jefferson approved funds for the very first interstate federally funded highway. You could almost equate the National Road to I-70 of its day. And so it effectively linked east and west from Cumberland, Maryland, headed towards Wheeling, Virginia. And in that area in Pennsylvania, it closely followed the trail that Washington had surveyed and had worked on. In fact, in some locations, it was right on top of the old Braddock Trail. So moving westward, the road opened up opportunities along that corridor It took many years to survey and many years to complete, and it was finished in Indiana in 1834, and it linked Richmond to Terre Haute. In fact, the new state capital of Indianapolis was going to be right on the surveyed line for the National Road, because the road was supposed to go through the new capitals of these new states as well. So Columbus, Ohio, Indianapolis, and even Vandalia, Illinois, which was the capital of Illinois at the time. So it provided a great opportunity for economic development. And so here in Wayne County, you can really see that economic development very early on. Here in Richmond, you got to cross the river. And before that river was bridged with the National Road, it was a nice stopping point, because you had to stop to ford the river or figure out a way across the river. Once the bridge is completed, it's a little easier, but numerous shops and amenities that travelers needed sprung up immediately in Richmond. We're the first city in Indiana. I often think of the pioneers thinking, hey, if we can just make it to Indiana, we'll stop there for the night. Richmond's the place. And so you get blacksmith shops, wheelwrights, carpenters, wagon shops, hotels, taverns, pubs, you name it, all developed very quickly because of the National Road. And you can see that downtown in Richmond, and especially in downtown Centerville and downtown Cambridge. You can see the evidence, the historic fabric that was left behind by this era. So to get to the Huddleston House, John Huddleston was an entrepreneur. He himself was a product of westward migration. He was born to a Quaker family in North Carolina, and because of the issue of slavery, they moved to Indiana when he was still a youngster, and lived in Liberty, just south of Richmond. And he married in 1830, and by 1834, he's looking for land. And in 1835, he purchases 78 acres where the Huddleston House now stands on the south side of the National Road. He knew that the National Road was coming through. It was actually just finished a year before he purchased the property. And it was a great opportunity to sort of set up shop, not only as a farmer, but as an entrepreneur. The Huddleston House itself, the basement, the doors all face the road. And on either end of the house, there's kitchens on that first level, that ground floor. And it said that those kitchens were travelers' kitchens. So travelers who were traveling westward on the National Road, or maybe even a few traveling east, could stop, they could rest, they could park their wagons, rest their oxen or horses in the barns, and prepare a meal over the hearth. It was sort of a symbolic place in a sense, because the hearth was home. And even though you're away from home, you could stop at the Huddleston House and make a meal. So in a larger sense, Huddleston facilitated westward migration. In the 1840s, the National Road in 1849 was a huge corridor for people who were traveling west to California during the gold rush. You could go all the way to Oregon, and the Santa Fe Trail. I shouldn't say you could go all the way to Oregon. You could go all the way to St. Louis and then go onto the Oregon Trail or the Santa Fe Trail and move even farther west. So it really facilitated the growth of the country, and especially the growth of this region.
Such rich history. I mean, you're just full of facts and information, and it's fascinating. And I just hope that our audience, our community, grasps a little bit of the significance of that history, and how much fun it is to connect that with what's going on now, and the fact that you can actually, like you said, especially in Centerville and Cambridge City, you can really see the buildings, and it's not so difficult to imagine what it could possibly have been like then.
Exactly.
And that's just exciting to me. It's just a neat way of reviewing that.
And the road would go through a series of sort of phases, if you will. By the 1850s, the railroads become the prominent form of transportation, and so the road begins to decline. And it sort of comes back more as our what we more modernly refer to the road as is US 40. And in the 19-teens and 20s, with the affordable automobile, the road gets a new designation, becomes part of US 40 in 1926. US 40 is a much longer road, federally designated. In that time, the federal government really was reorganizing highways so that they made sense a little bit more as far as numbers and rather than names. And the US 40 tells us that it was intended to be a transcontinental route. Whenever you see the zero in the number, that means it goes all the way across the country. So Interstate 70 was intended to be a transcontinental route, and that's why it has a zero at the end of that. Yeah, so there's some deliberate designation in there, if you will. So another group that I work with via Indiana Landmarks is the Indiana National Road Association. Right. And I'm the executive director of that organization. We have board members throughout the state, mainly along the National Road Corridor, through the 8 counties that the National Road passes through from Richmond to Terre Haute. And our goal is to preserve, protect, and promote the historical resources along the National Road. So one of our big projects, we've actually had a few big projects in the last 3 years, but 2 of them that I'll mention. One is the National Road Heritage Site at the Huddleston Farmhouse.
Okay.
It's an exhibit in the basement in those old traveler's kitchens,
right.
So very fitting to tell that story where the history actually happened. And it talks about the National Road from east to west, from sort of start to finish, not just focused on Indiana, but really looking at the big picture. And hopefully a takeaway from that is that you understand that National Road is not just Indiana, but it's the development of the country.
Road.
It's the National Road in
Road.
the early days. And so that was, established and opened in 2011, in September of 2011. Now, another project we've been working on that has just come to completion is the Historic National Road panels.
Yes.
And I should add that the National Road is a National Scenic Byway. It was designated a National Scenic Byway in 1998, but as part of interpreting a National Scenic Byway, byways put up panels, interpretive panels to tell the story and to tell the different themes that go on or went on the National Road. So we have 15 interpretive panels that span from east to west. Wayne County was fortunate enough that we actually have 4 in Wayne County, more than any other county in the state. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're so rich in our early historic resources. So the Richmond Wayne County Tourism Bureau, the old National Road Welcome Center, there's a panel there. There's one at the Madonna of the Trails statue at Glen Miller Park. And that panel, each panel has a different theme that speaks to the National Road history. The one at Glen Miller Park speaks to women's roles on the National Road as sort of that pioneer mother, which is what that statue represents as well. Centerville, the panel outside the Centerville Public Library talks about pike towns like Centerville that tell us what was going on and why towns like Centerville were springing up. And the one at the Huddleston House talks about agriculture and why agriculture was important along the National Road. So a large wealth of information, of course. And I encourage everyone, we're in the process of putting together publications to let everyone know where exactly these panels are. So we encourage everyone to drive them, look for them, and learn a little bit more about the National Road, but in doing so, learn more about the history of the country.
And we were talking at break about what a wonderful opportunity this is for groups and especially families. I'm thinking about families taking a road trip.
Exactly.
And how much fun and how affordable. We're talking about the price of gas typically, which isn't necessarily, but we're not talking about going to some type of expensive resort. And learning about something that's important to, why we are who we are.
Sure.
And talk about helping history come alive. I think for kids, it's important that they actually see you hear them saying all the time, this doesn't have anything to do with me now, but it does.
But it does.
And this might be a wonderful way for families to help their children get connected to why.
Especially if you live near the National Road today, it still affects us. We shop on the National Road. Whether you know it as the National Road or not, we shop on the National Road for the most part. We live there, we work there, and it's still the corridor that really makes our communities strong. It's the downtowns of our communities here in Wayne County. And so, from Richmond to Terre Haute, it's not that far. It's 156 miles, which is an easy day trip if you really wanted to take your time. If you wanted to drive the full length of the National Road, we're kind of here on the western end, if you will. But you could go all the way to Vandalia, Illinois, or even going east, you can go all the way to Cumberland, Maryland, and beyond, because the National Road was not static. It was always growing. There were extensions that took it from Vandalia to East St. Louis, and then later another extension from Cumberland, Maryland to Baltimore. So you can hop on the National Road right here in Richmond and go all the way to Baltimore if you'd like, and experience not only Indiana but beyond. There's tons of historic sites, tons of interesting little things on the side of the road that you may not even notice if you're not looking for them. Little artifacts, if you will, watering troughs from the early 1900s, remnants of the inner urban eras, and so forth.
Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. And as far as the National Road goes, if people want to connect with you,
Sure.
have questions, want to do some type of volunteering in some way, or
that'd be
some type
great.
of support, how would they connect with you?
They can connect through us via our website, www.indiananationalroad.org. They can also email me at INRA, I-N-R-A, at indianalandmarks.org. We're an affiliate of Indiana Landmarks, so we have a close partnership with them.
Wonderful. Joe, thank you so much for being here
Thank you.
as my guest. I have learned so much, and I'm just excited. I have a son at home, and I'm thinking of ways that we might be able to connect with this and have some fun together. So thank you for
Great.
being
Thank
our
you so
guest.
much. Thank you for
Thanks.
having me.
And thank you for joining us on the Third Sector.